Welcome to the January update for the Year in Our Garden series. Now, January here in Tasmania, of course, is the middle of summer, and today it is really quite warm and humid, a little bit unusually so for our area. We had quite a lot of hot weather at the beginning of January as the mainland of Australia had major heat waves. Of course, we didn't have the crazy temperatures that they had up there, and thankfully we didn't have the bushfires that they also had following their heat. Our thoughts go to all our fellow Australians on the mainland that have been affected by the bushfires. Living in the forest, we're very much aware of the risks and dangers of bushfire, but thankfully Tasmania this year, with one exception, has been relatively bushfire free. January is a month that really is very much about fruit, and the first fruit that we had was the cherries, which were really fantastic. Only having a couple of small trees, the crop wasn't that large. We only had, I think, about 4 kilos overall, but they were really first class cherries and very much enjoyed. Of course, we continued to pick the brambleberries during the month. They are now at the end of the month coming to an end. There's still a few there, but within a few days the net will come off because it's not worth having them when there's only a small amount of berries and the vine wants to grow and grow through the net very quickly, so it will come off in a few days' time. The other fruit that we had and picked was the black currants. We picked a good crop off the black currants and we made some jam, as we have in the past. Every year it's the main use we put to the crop is to make a batch of jam that lasts for the year. One of the biggest fruit crops that we've had this month is the peaches. The tree was absolutely loaded and we've been picking those, eating them, bottling them, and today, later today, I will go and pick the last of those peaches and put probably most of them into bottles. Also, we had some apricots. Our trees are not that large and the crop wasn't that heavy, but the quality was good and they were really tasty. The apples, of course, are still at least a month or more away, but they are developing really nicely, increasing in size, and we look to have a fairly good crop this year, which is absolutely fantastic. And I think we're going to get really good quality as well, which is most important. But not to be ignored is the tree behind me, which is the mulberry tree. Now this is an English mulberry, and if you haven't had these have the most spectacular flavour. It just explodes in your mouth. They aren't that large, but the flavour is incredible. We don't tend to pick them as a crop, but what we tend to do is come here and browse after a meal, have your dessert on the tree. The birds get some too, but they don't seem to be taking a huge number and having a great impact because there is lots and lots on here, and you can share a few then. But they're really tasty, and look, they're a flavour that you're not going to actually get to enjoy unless you grow a tree yourself. They are a fruit which, once picked, I'll see if I can find one that's ripe. They need to be quite black. It's all been fairly heavily picked over here, but there's one. It's not as black as it looked underneath the tree, but they very easily, once they're ripe, get your fingers covered with juices, and so it wouldn't be very good in the supermarket, but really exciting to eat. Another berry worthwhile growing if you enjoy the flavour of blackberries is a thornless blackberry, and I've got this one here next to the door of my shed, and it's just starting to ripen. And so far we haven't really picked many off it because the few that have been ripening tend to get snacked on as you're going past. Amazingly also, the birds haven't been touching these. I haven't netted it and I haven't really seen that there's bedding going to the birds. But being a thornless berry, it is something you can grow in a situation like this where you're going past, and you wouldn't want a thorned berry here because you'd probably catch on it. And look, this will grow into a huge vine if you gave it the space. Being here, I have to confine it quite severely. I will come and clip these back to stop it getting large and keep the berry nice and tight, because I simply haven't got the space in this location. Look, it gives a nice berry, not massively large. Probably would be better if I watered it, because I don't really water in this spot at all. But the lovely blackberry flavour. Delicious. So what's been happening in the veggie garden? Let's go and take a look. The first thing that I did in the veggie garden in the month was to dig the garlic. That's the elephant garlic that I dug. I had dug the true garlic earlier, but I got the elephant garlic out of the ground, and I also cut the roots off. I find this a way that is really good to actually clean them up. The roots can go on the compost. If they are rather dirty, I sometimes will wash them, but this time they were quite clean. So what I did was I hung them here under this bit of shelter near the hen house, and they've been drying nicely over the last 3 weeks. I basically wait for these stalks to dry back, and look, within a couple of weeks I will come and cut these off, and they can then take these whole bulbs inside, put them somewhere where air can still flow through them, but the temperature is fairly stable. And look, elephant garlic, as I've said this so many times, is great because of the way it keeps. These will keep for over a year without attempting to grow. They will only grow when you actually put them back in the ground. Out of the ground, I've never really seen them shoot. So worth growing some if you can get hold of them. The next job that I did was to dig the early season crop of potatoes, and I got a fairly good result. I dug it over probably 3 or 4 weeks, digging some each week. I then cleaned up for some green manure. So what am I going to do next with this soil? Well, in my rotation plan, the next crop to come into this bed is garlic, and that's not going to happen until autumn arrives. It's now midsummer, so it's around 3 months before another crop, it's a productive food crop, comes into this bed. So what I'm going to do, rather than just let it sit and weeds grow, is to plant it with a summer green manure crop. So I'll clean it up and then seed it, and I will have to water it to actually get some germination this time of the year. So having returned the vegetation to the compost heap and raked the dust out, I'm now ready to make up some green manure seed. I have here some oat seed. I'm using that simply because I have a fair bit of it. You could use wheat acceptably too, but they will germinate reasonably well in summer here. It's not that hot that it's a problem. To it I'm adding some mustard. Now this is mustard that I bought from a spice rack. I find it the cheapest way to buy some mustard seed, and the mustard is really good for reducing any nematode that might be in the soil. Not that I have any evidence of it, because I regularly do this. To it I'm adding some blue peas. Now these are ones that you'd buy to cook. You used to be able to buy these in the supermarket here, but now I seem to have to go to the health food store. It seems people don't eat blue peas and cook them and eat them these days like they used to once, but they are a really cheap way of actually getting pea seed to utilise. I can get into this. If you go and buy it as garden pea seed, it will cost a lot more, but getting it this way, it works just fine and it's a lot cheaper. So that's probably, yeah, I've used about half of that, so about 250 grams of pea seed into that. So basically this creates quite a cheap green manure mix, and I'll simply broadcast that over the area, then rake it in and then water. And once it's watered, I can hope for some rain in a few days. Whether that will come is another question, but I might have to keep watering to get it germinating and underway. Now it's a couple of weeks later and you'll see the green manure is looking great. It's really grown well. Not only did I initially water it, but we actually got 50 millimeters of rain, which was really great to get in the dry season of the year. Not that we've had much else. There is the suggestion of some rain tonight coming, and hopefully that comes as a follow-up, but having that rain really brought this on and has really helped the garden maintain. We also, following that rain, and even a bit before it, but around that, had cooler temperatures, cooler mornings, and even some of the days a little bit cooler. So that takes some of the heat stress off the plants and they do a little bit better. So as I've mentioned in the last video I did on potatoes, the mid-season crop is growing really well, and I have now planted the late season crop as well. So that's in the ground and will be 2 or 3 weeks before it appears. My semi-wild kiwi fruit grow pretty crazy during summer, and they really have to be trimmed back. I find the simplest way of doing this is to cut the young soft shoots with the hedge trimmer. This works really well, providing you're careful for the new fruit that are developing underneath. Keep an eye out for them, and also be careful of cords and legs. But this very quickly tames them back to something that looks a bit better and stops them becoming absolutely insane. One crop we've really been enjoying are the cucumbers. Here in the greenhouse, a month ago they were only just starting to move. Now they're growing really well and producing heaps of fruit. There's so much fruit in here that you basically have to eat at least a cucumber every day to keep up with it, if not more. This variety is called Muncher. It is a Lebanese type cucumber, but I think it is the most enjoyable green cucumber that I've really grown. It's much better than most of the others, and look, not only will it grow indoors, but I also have some growing out in the raised beds. Outside it comes a little later. It's only just about to start producing out there. Having some indoors gives us an earlier start, and sometimes will extend later. It just depends how the season goes, but well worth growing. If you haven't tried it, get some seed and give it a go. Next to the cucumbers that I've got growing outdoors, you'll notice that the climbing beans are really getting underway. Now, they've been really slow to get going this year. Normally they're a bit earlier and a bit faster, but they're finally starting to flower, so some beans are not far away. What I grow are a Blue Lake climber. I really enjoy those because they taste very similar to most of the bush beans, and of course much easier to pick and take less space really for the amount that you can produce. So despite the fact that they're a little bit late, they're now taking off and still should give us a good crop. Now down here I want to have a look at the tomatoes that I grew from seed. It's all pretty wild in this corner of the garden, but these tomatoes have the most advanced fruit. Now I don't unfortunately have any tomatoes that are ripening yet. It still looks like a week or two away, but these are by far the most advanced. They're more advanced than the ones that we'll look at in a moment, which I grew from plants, and look like they'll give us the first tomatoes. So yeah, I haven't really cared for these, haven't staked them, but they're doing really well. Now most things in the garden are doing really well too, but I wanted you to look at this silver beet plant, which is just fantastic, beautiful leaves. Now the major difference between this plant and the other plants that are growing together is that this plant has space. It's on its own because I haven't planted anything else in this bed yet. And because it has plenty of root base to develop and no competition for moisture or nutrients, it's produced a beautiful plant. Look, this is a note, I think, to myself as well as anyone else, that giving plants more space, resisting the urge to overplant, will give you better plants, healthier plants, and better produce. Another example is a beetroot that I dug earlier this month, that the seed had been dropped in a place on its own, and the size of that beetroot was massive, and it also tasted delicious. So yeah, resist that urge to overplant. I need to do it myself. I often tend to want to pack plants in, and I need to remember to give them more space, perhaps grow less, but get more. The zucchinis are finally starting to give us some decent size produce, and the leeks, which I planted back in November, are also starting to grow well now. They'll come along nicely for late autumn and winter. There's a little gap there where the dog decided to bury a bone, but that's the type of things that happen in a garden. So let's go and look at the tomatoes that I planted from plants rather than seeds. Now, while these plants are growing really well, getting quite high, and I actually need to come back and tie them again, because about every week or two I need to come through and do that, because they just keep growing basically, particularly the Rouge de Marmande, which are an indeterminate tomato. There's one here which is a Roma. It's being determinate, of course, doesn't grow as tall. But the fruit isn't near as developed as those that I planted from seed. There is quite a bit of fruit on, but it's still fairly small and hasn't really enlarged. I do have a little bit of rust problems going on. Normally I would have come and cut a lot of these lower leaves off, but I just haven't had the time to do it this time. It may give some problems. I should really do that. It is the best thing to do, is to cut a lot of these lower ones back. But the main growth up here is really what matters and what's feeding the plant. Whatever I do, even if I don't get the time to actually give them the care they need, we still with this number are going to get quite a good crop of tomatoes. Now you'll notice over here the corn, which is really starting to grow well, and it's going to give us a really good crop. It's looking nice and dark and green. It has suffered a little bit with some of the wind that we've had over the last couple of weeks, but recovering pretty well. But I wanted to show you an experiment in the greenhouse that I'm doing there. Yes, I'm trying to grow some corn in the greenhouse. Now that might seem pretty strange, but I've tried growing second crops of corn to stage it a bit later outdoors, and have either found that there wasn't much difference in cropping time, or that the second crop tended to fail because the temperatures were cooling down. So I thought, I've got this bed free, I'll try a few in here and see how they go. I'm not sure whether I've planted them at the right time to get them coming through as a second stage. I imagine they will move quite quickly in here over the next few weeks while it's still warm. Hopefully there's still then enough warmth around to bring them to a good crop after the outdoor corn is finished. So it's a complete experiment. I don't know how it's going to work out, but you'll see in the next 2 or 3 months how this actually eventuates. Over the last few months we've been making a few building modifications, largely for the purpose of creating a space where we can be indoors yet still experience the garden more and actually get to see it better and have a little bit more space in the house. So we've built essentially what you might call a sunroom. Part of that was veranda previously. So as part of that, I have been reusing the pavers here. This is a job that is still not complete. I still need to finish laying these pavers and tidying up the ends. Elizabeth has been putting some colour into some pots at the entrance to make it look very attractive, and we've added a small new garden bed beside the house. Lastly, I wanted to bring you back here to the chickpeas to see how they're going. You'll notice that they're beginning to yellow now. That's basically that these pods generally have some chickpeas in them, and if I can open it, yes, they're only, look, mostly only one chickpea per pod, but there are a lot of them, so hopefully that does translate into still a reasonable crop. And you know, there's a lot of pods on each bush, so it'll be interesting to see how it goes. Now, some of you may remember that I also planted as an experiment some peanuts. Well, that was an absolute failure. There is one very small plant that has emerged, and it's obviously not going to come to anything, being this late in the season. I don't know what the reason is there, whether the seed wasn't good, whether it was too old, not viable, or whether it's the soil and conditions. But yes, the peanuts were a failure, but so far the chickpeas are looking like a possible success. Now, what's going to happen next in our garden? Well, probably the next major thing is that the blood plums are coming to ripeness, and within a couple of weeks we'll begin to pick those, and because they come in large amounts, we'll be bottling lots and lots of plums as we do every year. Planting wise, I'll be cleaning out the broad beans, which are drying at the moment. The remnant of the crop that I didn't harvest fresh is drying on the pods, and I'll clean those out, collecting the pods, and then into there I will be ready to plant some brassicas. Principally, probably some broccoli will go in for autumn, maybe cabbages or cauliflower, not sure yet, I'll have a think about that. I've never had great success growing cauliflower, but always can try again. Other than that, probably not a lot more is going to happen over February. It's other than we'll probably need to really keep the watering up, because I don't expect lots of rain. February is one of the driest months of the year here in our section of Tasmania. So that's been January, and I'll come back at the end of February and give you another update.